If you watched TV at all during the 70s, 80s, or 90s, odds are you saw something that passed through the hand of Kenneth Johnson. Johnson helped warp the landscape of network television, with a career that goes all the way back past Alien Nation and V to the premier sci-fi series of the 70s, The $6 Million Man. I mean, just look at that show. And then look at all the stale westerns, bad cop dramas, and so-called classic sitcoms that shared its airspace. One of these things was not like the others. One contained secret government organizations with cyborg super agents, supervillains with earthquake machines, and alien robot Bigfoots, played by Andre the Giant. May sound strange to those of you who are used to overabundance, but these things used to be a lot harder to come by, at least on TV. Such things are, of course, the everyday fare of your average superhero comic, and most of the below-average ones, too. Fuck them, though. I want to review something good. Or at least, something that I actually remember fondly. Fresh off creating The Bionic Woman, Johnson found himself faced with a choice. Universal Television was knocking on the door, asking him to develop one of the many, many superhero properties it had recently purchased from Marvel Comics. Johnson, being a filmmaker and lover of serious drama, which in this era of television tended to mean dead love interests. That's why Jamie Summers died at the end of her first appearance. Turned his nose up at the very idea of doing a superhero TV show, despite having arguably made his name working on one, and made himself an even bigger name by creating another. And then he ran off and read Victor Hugo's universally beloved novel, Les Miserables, and found himself inspired. Which is funny when you remember that Les Mis got bent over a critical barrel when it first came out in 1862. That era's guardians of good taste called it vulgar, artificial, tasteless, and inept. 30 years after the fact, the very idea of sympathizing with the rights of man society made all the right people hold scented hankies to their noses. Even if you got past all that, you wound up with a big fat tome's worth of capital R romanticism. Because I know that's what I think of when I think of the Incredible Hulk.
You lie!
Yeah, but there's some precedence for this connection. Actual capital R romantic poet William Wordsworth once said poetry should be the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And really, what else is the Hulk? Well, among many other things, he's probably the least television-friendly character in Marvel's superhero catalog. And yet, this pilot and the series it spawned succeeded where the Amazing Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Red Brown's Captain America movies failed, creating a 5-year series that went on to enjoy near immortality in syndication to this very day. This despite departing almost as much from its source material as any of its brethren, if not more so than most. At least Peter Parker, Steve Rogers, and Stephen Strange got to keep their first names. Still, the question becomes, what the hell did this thing do to engender itself so much goodwill? So cue it up. We all know how this goes. Dr. David Banner, physician, scientist. Huh. White text on a black screen. Unsourced quotations. Howling wind sound effects. This way, everybody watching this pilot knows the damn thing is super serial. And we need to know that because the first thing we see in the movie are... Yeah, either this is a dream sequence, or the last porno director who rented this camera before Johnson and his crew forgot to wipe the Vaseline off the lens. Aw, yeah. This is Dr. David Banner's subconscious, reminding you that disco will never die. Very quickly, we see why we have seatbelts and roll cages in modern cars. We also see what is more or less a universal fear. The simple and obvious truth everyone in love must face eventually.
She is going to die, and there is nothing you can do to stop it.
Of course, it's a dream, and starting things off that way is pretty damn cheap, but I guess I could be nice and call it economical storytelling. Because cheap does not equal bad, as we see here when we learn everything we need to know about David Banner in 3 cuts, and the piano music kicks back in. Single notes in almost isolation that maybe, just maybe, might be slouching their way towards the theme. All the music in this comes to us from Joe Harnell, son and grandson of musicians, member of the Glenn Miller Air Force Band, student of Leonard Bernstein.
Leonard Bernstein!
Yes, that Leonard Bernstein. If not under Bernstein, then through simple experience, he learned how music should affect the audience. by reflecting the tone of the show. Melancholy feels almost like too soft a word for the kind of unnerving weirdness he layers on top of half this movie. Skip ahead to the lab scene for a second. Give it a listen. So the first and best thing this pilot did was establish a mood, an atmosphere of regret, melancholia that builds as Harnell articulates more and more of what would become the show's primary theme song. You get those first 3 notes in the opening cuts, showing where Hulk really comes from. It's like right there. Yeah, right there. Empty space on the bed. Boom. And the incomplete little bit of theme sneaks into the interview scene montage as the scientific basis for the Hulk becomes clear.
I spoke with the medevac that flew you out of there. He said what you did was physically impossible.
I guess he was wrong.
But it's only at the moment Kenneth Johnson felt perfectly symbolized the tone of this show, as well as the direction it would eventually take, that the full theme comes to the fore. And wonder of wonders, it's a consistent theme, which established a consistent tone. And that's harder to maintain than almost anything, especially when you're trying to create a show for everyone. Especially since the real target audience for most TV pilots at this point, as now, are skittish network executives who needed everything carefully explained to them.
Hey, I can't break it!
See, I told you.
It's some kind of a special egg.
No, it isn't. Things can be a lot stronger than they look. It's the real egg. Crack it. That's it. You see, but it was a lot stronger than you thought, right?
Oh, lost another egg, huh?
Uh-huh.
Also, there's a lot of overemphasized parallelism, just to make sure we get it.
But you see, the door of the car was pinned down by the weight of the car. But I tried and I tried to pull that door open. I can tell you, I was just really frantic.
You get it? Oh, by the way, just in case you didn't get it, David Banner's plagued by loss and survivor's guilt due to his inability to save his wife from a car that was obviously unsafe at any speed. If you pack the bottom with straw, I don't know why you're surprised when it catches on fire. I make fun, but for most of my childhood, this pilot was the gold standard of what I now know to call super science. Because it's certainly not regular science. Culver Institute must be spending all of its money on computer paper, because there's no grad students to be seen here. No other doctors either, besides Dr. Ben, and he seems to spend all of his time recalibrating the machines, including the gamma injector Dr. Banner straps himself into once he finds a connection between sunspot activity and the hidden strengths that all humans apparently have. Turns out it flows from a freakish protein cluster in their subject's DNA.
That's impossible.
The same variant in your DNA. Even more than most of the others.
As a kid, I always thought the implication here was that we all have this thing kicking around in our genetic code somewhere. Banner just happens to have a little bit more of it than others. This established the formula the series would follow for the next 5 years. Everyday inconveniences leading to astonishing overreactions. For what else is the Hulk, right? Actually, like almost every superhero, the Hulk's been plenty of things over the 50-plus years of his publication. But Kenneth Johnson didn't know any of that. The Hulk we have here is a mute id, a
childish subhuman.
raging against whatever happened to be on David Banner's mind when the transformation kicked in. Now, if this were Ang Lee's Hulk, I'd be compelled by internet movie critic law to put it on blast for wasting all of this time with all of this boring character development stuff when we really want to see a dumb action picture. But it's Kenneth Johnson's Hulk, so it gets a free pass to do this thanks to being a TV movie from the 70s starring Bill Bixby. Because that makes sense, right? Wrong! Jesus, Luther, don't scare me like that. Shit. The fact is, this thing does what good movies should and takes its time, thereby keeping us in suspense, which in turn keeps us watching through all of the super science technobabble Doctors Banner and Marks trade back and forth with each other.
Nothing on the EG.
Well, what about the GSR?
No, nothing there either.
And despite the fact that there's no villain in this piece.
Dr. Banner?
Yes?
I'm Jack McGee from the National Register.
Excuse me.
Jack McGee does not count. As Inspector Javers go, McGee's one of the lamest, since he has no real authority besides the power of the press, whatever that means, and however much power his press contains.
National Register is not exactly the Washington Post.
No, not exactly. That's why we've been ducking him.
Here he exists to give the Hulk his name and to annoy Banner.
Anytime you feel an interview coming on, you get in touch, will you?
That's 1-800-SMARMY-BASTARD. Mostly because somebody has to, and the show wouldn't have the money for the kind of big-scale military response to a Hulk rampage that were the comics' bread and butter until the beginning of Season 4, which shared a name with a certain Ridley Scott film I recently reviewed. Funny old world we live in, isn't it? Speaking of which, this scene makes me think Johnson read at least one comic book before he settled into this job. It's right out of Frankenstein. Or The Modern Prometheus, if you prefer. Both the book and James Whale's film contain a scene pretty much just like this. And in the book, unlike the film, the monster really is trying to save someone from drowning, and he gets shot in the arm for his troubles. Doesn't tear up the campsite, though. That's new. Nor does he throw anyone into a lake. That was just 70s TV law. If you get the villain wet, the fight is over. It's like Rule 12 of Fight Club. Oh shit, I just talked about Fight Club. God damn it. Cut. All this is perfectly in character, and it perfectly jives with Stan Lee's original conception of the character, which, among other things, entitled making the Hulk gray, like Frankenstein's monster. Limitations in early 60s printing technology led the Hulk to be gray, green, and even blue, depending on which page you happen to be reading at the time. So bright green eventually became his default color, and that worked out pretty well for everyone, especially since, for whatever reason, people tend to think the Frankenstein monster is already green. Just like they tend to think your name's Frankenstein. And like The Modern Prometheus, this pilot right here is a psycho-slash-physiological horror story, with overtones of another literary classic that Dr. Banner straight up calls.
I want to be Dr. Banner, not Dr. Jekyll.
Eh? Do you get it? Do you get it? Bixby certainly did. He plays a Banner who, despite being a nice guy, has some deep-seated rage issues he hadn't even bothered to address since his wife died. He's the worst possible person in the world to get this kind of power. A werewolf trapped in a scientist's body, scared of his own Jungian shadow. Self-sabotage and insecurity have defined his life, even more so than the rest of the Avengers. No matter who you are, everyone in the Marvel Universe from Peter Parker to Tony Stark can take one look at Bruce Banner and say, damn, at least my life doesn't suck that much. And that carries through to this pilot, along with the series it spawned, preserving a sense of continuity despite all of the bullshitty cosmetic changes made to the character. Let's try to summarize. We've got a main character the movie carefully establishes with 30 minutes of solid interaction with his love interest. We've got a love interest smart enough to not take any of his bullshit and tough enough to face down the motherfucking Hulk. Seriously, that takes some ovaries, girl. Good job. We've got a monster born of scientific hubris and good old-fashioned stupidity, brought out by the horrible luck that's plagued the protagonists of melodrama since the first cave people swapped stories around fires. We've got the ultimate fusion of those two medieval archetypes, the monster and the persecuted hero, that power most modern horror stories. And just when everything starts looking up, tragedy strikes, because some dumbass tabloid writer knocked a jug of solvent off a shelf.
David!
Now that's how you end a movie, with a big frickin' explosion. Am I right, Michael Bay? The people genuinely responsible for all this, McGee and Dr. Ben, the scotch-taping bastard, get off scot-free, while David wanders away to the stirring notes of The Lonely Man. As a movie, it's obviously a pilot for a TV series from the late 70s, with all of the typical pacing problems that entails. So if you tuned in for an action-heavy explosion and combat fest, all this technobabble is probably going to bore you to tears. If you tuned in for a subtle, hyper-realistic 70s sci-fi show, you're going to find yourself needlessly talked down to by idiots who have to hang the periodic table up in their lab, because, you know, they're scientists and all. And yet, here I am, going on about The emotional power of good theme music, classical horror novels, and abnormal psychology. And it makes you wonder, maybe the Hulk could be all of these things. Nah, who am I kidding? Who'd want to watch a movie like that?